All right. Welcome back, everyone, to episode 3 of Off the Record with LLG. I'm Vic Kustra, and with me today is Eric Thomas. Eric, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Of course. Thank you for joining us. So you just got back from Kentucky, right?
I did, yes. My wife and I went down there for a mini vacation. But really, I went down to check out the equine activities and establishments down there. And it's a beautiful place. I mean, that's what they're known for.
Cool. What do you mean when you say equine establishments? Like, what were you doing?
You know, we went to Churchill Downs and
Okay.
took a tour, went to the stables. We went to a equine establishment in Lexington called Keeneland's, where a lot of the thoroughbred horses are trained from when they're born all the way up to the age of 3 in hopes of getting into the Kentucky Derby. That was a very neat establishment to see.
Yeah, I've never been there. It's always been something that's been interesting, but was that your first time?
That was my first time, and what really piqued my interest is my foray into equine practice at our law firm, and practicing, as they call it, horse law. And I wanted to familiarize myself with some of the terminology and some of those activities that occur behind the scenes. So it was just really neat to see.
Is horse law the official term?
I think it's called equine law.
Okay.
But when you say that, people don't understand what that means.
All right. Well, you have to elaborate and tell us what it means. That way we have an understanding. Because I'll admit, I mean, even though we practice together, and I hear a little bit of what goes on whenever you're having those conversations with clients, I'm not super well versed on what exactly goes into that practice. So, please dive into that a little bit.
The statute is very finite, first and foremost. But what goes into that practice is it's anything surrounding the enjoyment of horses, whether it's for work or pleasure or entertainment. There are about 4 or 5 pitfalls that you find and discover organically working in the equine industry. And so that's where that equine law practice comes into play. What you typically find is folks operating stables, ranches, breeding horses without contracts in place. It's a very small community. Everybody knows everybody else. It's a lot of familiarity, right? A lack of formality. And it's okay until it becomes a problem. The statute itself points to specifically the liability or lack thereof with waivers for those types of establishments. And so there's been a misinterpretation and a misunderstanding of that statute as well. That's caused a lot of consternation in the community.
Is this a state statute?
It's a state statute, yes. And it basically says if you post a sign in 2 conspicuous locations in your facility where the general public can see it, you can't put it in the back of a stable, for example. But if it has the exact words in the statute that say you are not liable or you're liable for activities here under Pennsylvania law, you voluntarily waive your rights under Pennsylvania law. If you put those signs in 2 places, the understanding in the community is that you have no liability.
For what? Liability? Like, give an example of what could happen if and I would imagine this is a situation where somebody owns horses or is breeding horses and they don't have these signs posted on their stables or property.
Yeah, it's actually kind of the opposite. That's a great question. They post the signs thinking they have no liability,
Okay.
But in actuality they still do. And it's all those types of establishments you just mentioned. It's private owners that have friends and family coming over to interact with their horses. It's forward-looking, public-looking establishments that are selling training hours, that you bring your horse there, the trainer trains your horse, maybe you board your horse at the facility, the transportation of the horses to and from the facilities. Anytime you have the public coming and interacting, they can fall, injure themselves, those kind of things. So there's been a big misunderstanding. I would call that pitfall number 2 in the industry. There's a recent court case that just came out to illustrate this. And what it said was the gentleman went to the horse stable, and he said, I want an hour with the trainer, and I want to learn how to ride a horse. And the trainer said, sure, sign my waiver, this kind of stuff. And the gentleman got on the horse. He ended up falling off because one of the stirrups was defective. He broke his ankle, messed his knee up, had all these physical injuries, tries to resolve it with the stable, and they say, oh, we have no liability. We had the 2 signs up. That's on you. So they go to court. And the court interpreted that as not the case. The court essentially said that the public person, the person coming to your facility, has to know that that's the case before they waive any negligent acts that you might contribute to. If that, you follow me?
Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm. This is probably a bad analogy, but I'm thinking like whenever you go to someone's house and they have a "Beware of Dog" sign up.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Yeah, in that case, that's a perfect analogy. So what's happened is these stables read the statute, said if I put these two signs up, I'm not going to have any liability, and the courts are chipping away at that. Mm-hmm. That's not
saying
the case.
they have to go a little bit further.
Yep, they have to go a little bit further. They have to be responsible for the stirrup, as an example. The trainer can't put that on there whether he has intent or not. That's not the important aspect. It's whether or not you know, as the public individual coming in, that that's defective and still choose to use it.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's tightening up.
And is that just because of the nature of the animal? Like, what's the factual basis for that legal requirement? Whereas, like with a dog, it's a little bit different, or another animal. Like it must be something specific to the horse, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's the nature of the horse, the wild nature of the horse, the size of a horse.
Unpredictability, maybe, or like lack of control.
Yes.
That's really interesting.
Yes.
So, who do you think, like, is that something that's, in your opinion, important for like breeders or people who own horses privately or people who are riding horses? Like, who do you really think that applies to most, or who should be concerned about that?
I think anyone that has the public interacting with the horse they own, mm-hmm. whether it's at their own facility, whether it's at, and it could even be friends and family in all honesty, whether it's at a boarding facility, whether it's at a ranch, anyone that is letting their horse be ridden by someone other than themselves or interacted with other than them, on their own individually, needs to partake in this and be aware of it and put things in place to protect themselves.
Well, you said earlier this is like a whole community of people, right?
Yeah.
So in that community, what percentage of them are, and again, this is, I'm sure you don't have this factual, but like what percentage of them are working with lawyers, number one, and then number two, lawyers that actually know and practice in this space?
Very few. Very few. In my experience, not only is there very few lawyers practicing in this space, but the family nature of the community, they see each other at all the events, their kids grow up together, lends itself to that lack of formality, and people just don't pay attention to it, in all honesty. So you have the lack of contracts as kind of a pitfall, mm-hmm. right? You have the misinterpretation and understanding of the statute itself, and the waiver of liability concept that's built into the statute is another pitfall. And then I would call it a third pitfall is the transfer and exchange of horses between parties and failure to follow the required documentation there. So, for example, horses come to Western Pennsylvania on a very specific track. They come from Texas to Colorado to Kentucky to Pennsylvania in that same kind of reverse order. So there's a very, very distinct set of auction houses set up and private sales that follow that same kind of path. And people get to know people, right? After you've been to 10 auctions and bought 10 different horses, people start to get to know people. And there are very specific requirements for documentation relating to DNA of the horse, relating to the personality of the horse, right? The horse's natural tendencies. That must be disclosed to any potential buyer. And there's a lot of gamesmanship that happens there. Some of these auction houses, unfortunately, will drug horses. They will sedate them, make a video of the horse, and then put that out to the public and say, this horse is trail ready. And then someone purchases that horse, gets them home, and finds out they're not trail ready. So those types of issues, the transfer and exchange of horses, is another area where folks could really use some legal advice and someone looking out for their best interests.
Well, so what happens if you go to, in that situation you just described, right? You buy a horse, you think it's trail ready, it's not, and you find out that the seller was less than honest when it came to the information they were providing, and maybe even out of compliance with some sort of statutory requirement. What rights does the buyer have, or what sort of implications does that have on the transaction?
Yeah, so the first step in those transactions is to go to the seller and try to rectify the issue. The auction houses, the reputable ones, will backtrack to some extent. They will credit you money back. They will take the horse back, those kind of things. It's the private transactions get a little stickier. To give an example, we had a recent case to illustrate this to you, where a lady bought a horse from someone in Colorado. And she told the seller, I want to race this horse. I want to barrel race this horse. That's a sport that's very common for horses. People buy them and race them, just like people do cars. And the seller said, okay, no problem. There's no issues with this horse. Transfers the horse legally to this lady. The lady lived in Pennsylvania, and she gets the horse on her ranch. She's very familiar with horses. She has years and years of experience, right? And she goes through the veterinary process with this horse and discovers that this horse has lungs that bleed, so it can't run. She can't barrel race this horse. The intent of her purchase cannot be realized. So she calls the seller and says to the seller, hey, why didn't you tell me this horse was a bleeder? That's the term in the industry. And the lady kind of feigns, denies it and says, well, I don't really think that's the case. At that juncture, you have a cause of action to sue for a breach of that sales agreement, right? But in this case, the lady said, look, it's too costly and expensive for both of us, so I'll keep this horse. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to breed this horse. Well, you have to have a mandatory exchange of DNA when you transfer horses, right? That's another piece most people miss. In this case, the DNA arrived about a week after that conversation. And the purchaser, the buyer, who now can't race this horse, found out that this horse had a blood disorder where it could not have anesthesia injected into it, and so she wasn't able to breed it either. And so now she's in a situation where she's going to have to sue this lady for breach of contract unless she can settle and negotiate a settlement of some other kind.
Did they have a written agreement in place?
Yes, and a sales agreement in place.
It's
kind of like a bill of sale.
Right. And what sort of agreements, like, is it a uniform agreement? Is this something that somebody can go online and just say, oh, I found a sample agreement to sell a horse, or what's the standard that you see?
It's analogous to the real estate market.
Okay.
So there are state approved forms.
Okay.
That most people use. Mm-hmm. And then the drafting, the customized drafting is on the addendum side. Mm-hmm. So it just kind of depends on the transaction itself and what kind of horse it is.
When do you think it is appropriate for somebody to get a lawyer involved during the transaction process?
I would say at the beginning, after they've chosen the horse they'd like to purchase, interacted with the seller to the point where they're comfortable, I think they should bring a lawyer in just to review that initial agreement. Because
so before anything is signed, or before anything is maybe even like those addendums are drafted up?
Correct.
Maybe? Yeah.
Correct. Okay. Yeah, because being able to interact with that seller at that point, a lawyer's going to pick up on things, right, and ask questions, maybe talk to their attorney if they have one, and protect the client from making a bad decision.
Do you have to use that form agreement? Or?
You do not.
Oh, okay.
It's not mandatory.
So are there situations whenever you have seen people go outside of the form for one reason or another, or are there any particular situations where you think that that's actually the way to go?
Yeah, I think the template forms only get you so far and contemplate so much. We see that in real estate transactions too. It's very similar in this case. I think anytime you can negotiate the terms and conditions specific to your transaction, you're better off. Mm-hmm. And the clients that we've done that for, we've not had any issues yet with, and they've been very happy and satisfied. So you've got this lack of contracts in the industry. It's kind of a pitfall. You have a lack of understanding of the statute as it relates to liability and waiver of liability. You have the transfer of horses between parties and lack of proper documentation as a pitfall. And I would consider the boarding aspects, the operations of these facilities, to be pitfall number 4, if I could characterize it as such. And what happens in that case is when you board a horse today in the industry, you drop your horse off, they hand you a one-page waiver. You sign the waiver that it's a generic, overbroad waiver, right? And you give the horse to the facility, and then they have to do certain things for you and your property while they have your horse. They have to feed it so many times a day and water it, right, and clean it and take care of it. The vet may or may not be on site, right, and the medical aspects and care of the horse really becomes an issue. and it's not listed in the waiver or agreement what the vet is supposed to do. And so you can start to see where these like gray areas pop up and there's some kind of disagreement. Or the classic example is you own a horse and you drop it off and you tell the boarder, I do not want my horse ridden more than an hour a day. Okay, I don't want more than 5 people on this horse, hour a day at most. And they violate that. And you come up and find out that their horse is being ridden 8 hours a day and, those kind of things. And there's just no agreement to look at to see what duties each party had. And so it becomes a very difficult situation to work through.
And then if there's some, if something happens to the horse, obviously while they're in the care of the third party, or something maybe that even happens like after the fact, right? Like horses out of the care of that person or that boarding facility, and there's some sort of long-term health issue that pops up, and you find out that there's something maybe that wasn't done appropriately whenever it was being boarded, I would imagine that could come back.
Yes,
too.
The big issue, the exchange of medical records or lack thereof. Horses are expensive, and the care and maintenance of horses can be pretty expensive as well. Kind of tied along those lines, the other thing that I want people to be mindful of is they get really close with the trainer at these boarding facilities. This is kind of ancillary in this category to the main issue. And what happens is often the trainer will say, hey, I really like this horse, and I'd like to buy that horse from you, right? But I'm going to do it under the stable's name, that are the people I work for. And in exchange for that, I'll give you so many free hours or days or months or years in some cases of training, because the training is expensive too, right? You can come and ride this horse anytime you want to, those kind of things. And I've seen contracts where the signee, the person that signs the contract, cannot legally bind the stable. They don't own the stable. You know what I mean? They don't own they're just like an employee there, but it's an industry practice. They're the ones signing these agreements. And you could argue that it's actually void or voidable at that point.
Not enforced.
So you're right back to the starting point of this gray area, not really knowing.
Would you say that of the people in this industry that typically have representation, are they like I don't know if there are such a thing as like corporate, like boarding facilities, or more I don't want to say professional, but more like corporate kind of feeling facilities or players that are in the industry, or is it just kind of a mixed bag?
It's kind of a mixed bag. There are a few larger facilities that seem to have their ducks in a row, and have buttoned up the liability. But for the most part, the industry right now, it's just family members, neighbors, church mates, community people coming onto your property, putting their children on your horse.
Yeah, it seems like it, and I'm not I'm not an expert in horses. I'm definitely not an expert in equine law, but it's, just being around them, I feel like the people who typically have horses and are working with them really care about the animal. And I could understand how throwing a lawyer into the mix in certain types of situations might feel a little bit different than you would want it to when you're talking about a horse. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense.
I'm just trying to rationalize in my head why this is the way that it is, because to me, horses are they're a very prominent thing, right? Like they're a very prominent animal in our society, in our country, and there's a lot of money in it as well. And to not have legal counsel doesn't add up necessarily, but if I had to think through it, that's kind of where I land. It's like, people are just attached to these animals, and they feel like that will rise above everything else.
Yeah, there's some of that. I mean, to that point, a lot of folks, because of the money required to get into this, are sophisticated business owners or executives that come.
Right,
like
it's not a cheap thing to do. Like you can't just decide. Yeah,
and they're familiar with lawyers, but it is a very like organic, and there's a way to practice law to where you don't interact in that setting to where it starts to get too formal and stuffy and awkward and weird. But you're right. That's a great astute point you make.
So I have to ask, how did you become an expert in equine law? What? Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily say an expert at this point, but we had a need. Our founding and managing partner, Dan, had a lifelong dream to own horses, and he had 3 horses, I think, at one point, maybe 4, and he was running in those circles, and people were asking him questions, and things were happening, not to his horses, but at these establishments where he was, and folks found out that he was a practicing lawyer, and we're starting to kind of ask him questions and interact with him, and so he called me one Sunday and said, "Hey, I've got 4 or 5 people at this point that have, one of them had a waiver they wanted us to review because they had run into some trouble. Another one had a boarding issue. One lady wanted to buy a horse and she didn't know really what to do, and he said, could you kind of take this and run with it and study it?" And I said, "Of course, yeah, sure, I'll do that." So that weekend I read the statute, and thankfully it was pretty short and small. And I pulled the handful of cases that I could find and read that weekend to get an understanding of how it was being interpreted. And at that point, it was 0% of our practice.
And now it's on our website. I was looking
growing.
At that today. Yeah,
it's
really
growing.
Cool.
And as you run in circles in Western Pennsylvania and you talk to people, the overarching theme is almost like, wow, we've been trying to find someone that does that. Like you practice equine law, the people that know what it is.
Right.
I was approached by a gentleman downtown about a month ago. I was having a conversation with a lady that I met from my home state, and we were comparing childhood notes on where we grew up. And this gentleman kind of was sitting a few tables over, and he heard our conversation. And she, at some point, asked me, "What do you do for a living?" And I told her, and the end parting, almost kind of quiet part of my conversation was, "Oh, and I practice equine law." I just
right,
kind of slid it in there.
That, yeah.
And he heard this and was shameless in his eavesdropping and came up to the table and said, "I need your business card. I have like 5 people I need to introduce you to." So there's this kind of, I would say, pent-up need, especially as the years tick by. And thankfully, it's not an extremely litigious industry, but people are starting to realize that their interpretation of the statute, not having contracts in place, it just creates problems. Yeah. And it's a fairly easy, affordable fix.
Right. Well, that's all really great. Thank you for being with us today, and thanks for sharing everything. And next time we have you on, you're gonna have to dive in a little bit more to what barrel racing is, because we don't have enough time to cover that now. But I need to get a little more insight on that. But
sure thing. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Enjoyed myself.
Thanks.